A German food bank says it can no longer handle the sheer number of migrants the German government has dumped on it. The city of Essen has seen its Syrian population grow from 1,300 to more than 10,000 in just 2 years. And local poor residents say that aggressive male migrants routinely cut in line at the food bank and take most of the food, leaving them to go hungry. So one Essen food bank is refusing to sign up additional migrants. For that, they've been denounced as Nazis. Douglas Murray is the author of the excellent book, The Strange Death of Europe, and he joins us. This is the real tension in Europe that you write about between poor Europeans who actually bear the brunt of these migration policies.
Yes. Yes, that's right. It's very good to be with you, Mark. It's an amazing story, this, because this story of this single food bank in Essen, in West Germany, they're saying, look, we've got a lot of poor old people here. We've got a lot of women. We've got a lot of people who queue up and just we want to be helping. And these young migrants push ahead of them, and they just said, we want to help the people we're set up to help here. And for this, as you say, they've been called Nazis. The German Chancellor has come and sat on them and insulted them and instructed them to change their food bank policy. And this is absolutely typical of the pattern we see, not just in Germany, but across all of Europe. You know, Merkel invited in millions of people. The continent, unsurprisingly, is finding it difficult to integrate those people or even house them. And she attacks the people, rather than wondering whether or not she might have made a mistake herself.
Now, you use that fine old British word queue for what polite people do when they stand in line, as they say in the United States. I noticed when I was in Europe during the summer that all these migrants appeared, that I don't know whether it is that standing in line or queuing is a Anglo-American continental phenomenon, but on trains and just at kebab houses and all over the place, you saw routinely, the bus station, you saw routinely aggressive young men pushing women out of the way. Or even just at the supermarket. And I don't know whether that's because standing in line isn't part of their cultural tradition, or actually whether it's a portent of something rather more sinister.
Well, you know, you have it there. I mean, a young male migrant pushing ahead of an elderly woman in Germany. What's the natural response of the German state? To call the elderly lady a Nazi.
Right.
You know, say they're the problem. We just had this, by the way, in London, where I'm sitting. Just today, a young man who came illegally to the UK 3 years ago said to the UK officials when they did find him that he had been trained by ISIS. Then was allowed to roam around, and a year later, just last September, he left a bomb on the London Underground, which thankfully failed to completely detonate. So we had 30 people with singed hair instead of 30 school children in body bags. But, you know, everyone's onto the same thing. You know, what was it that failed in the specific counter-extremism policy? Or something? No. If you keep letting people in, you don't know who they are. The authorities keep on inviting people in at the kind of rate they have in recent years. You haven't got a hope.
Well, in Germany, they have this new party, Alternative für Deutschland, the alternative, which everyone says extreme right-wing. The problem isn't these nice, young, strapping, young Muslim men. The problem is that it's racist Europeans now voting for racist right-wing parties. Where's that going to end up eventually?
You know, I've been thinking about this a lot. My book just came out in translation in Germany this week, and so I've been dealing quite a lot with German press and so on. And, you know, I keep saying the same thing. You've got to be very careful how you tread in Germany. But look, let me put it this way. You've got to find a way for the German people who, for instance, are queuing at a food bank, or who see people who are poor queuing at a food bank, to allow them to raise problems, raise issues that concern them without calling them Nazis. You've just got to find a way. You've got to find a plausible way for them to vent their feelings about what they see. And currently, there is no way, because every way you turn, you're Nazi.
President Trump held his second meeting with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel today. Meanwhile, Europe's migrant crisis continues unabated, accelerated, if anything. Tens of thousands of migrants are still crossing the Mediterranean Sea, and recently, Austria remilitarized its Alpine border with Italy in order to prevent mass migrant arrivals there. Douglas Murray has thought a lot about this. He's the best-selling author of The Strange Death of Europe, and he joins us tonight. So, Douglas, I guess the obvious question, the president meets with Angela Merkel. Has her position on migrants softened at all? It seems to have totally overturned the politics and culture of her country. Has she rethought her views on it?
It certainly has overturned the politics of her country. She imported an extra 2% of the population into her country in a single year in 2015. But, you know, she last year, when she did badly in regional elections, she suddenly said what was reported as an apology. It actually wasn't. She just said, I wish we'd been better prepared for what happened. But, you know, the consequences of what she did in 2015, of opening basically the external borders of Europe to the world, anyone who walked in could get into Europe, is still being felt all the time. You just mentioned, I mean, 12,000 people came into the Italian islands alone just last weekend. This has consequences across the continent. As you mentioned, the Austrians sending troops to the Italian border to reinforce it. Just this past week, the Danish intelligence service said that the major threat to their country comes from the thousands of religious extremists in Sweden. Now, those aren't, you know, crazy Calvinists who are kicking off in Sweden. They're the people who've come recently into Sweden at Angela Merkel's invitation.
There was a New York Times piece today about the president's speech in Warsaw, and in it, because it's basically one long editorial, that paper now, they took a dig at the Polish government for not allowing the migrant flow that Germany and Belgium have. Central and Eastern Europe seem to be holding a line against this. Do you think they'll continue?
Yeah, they have. It's one of the most interesting things about this I remark upon in my book. Western Europe and Eastern Europe think totally differently about this. You know, a right-wing Prime Minister in Hungary and a left-wing Prime Minister in Slovakia are absolutely as one on the fact they don't want to take in millions of refugees and migrants. They don't think that it's the job of their countries to be a home for anyone in the world who wants to walk in and call their countries home. I don't think that's going to change. And by the way, that sneering of the New York Times and other papers, I mean, they should really reflect on the fact that even some of their sort of cherished figures are starting to realize this. A very interesting development this week. Bill Gates gave an interview to one of the German papers. Now, Bill Gates in 2015 said that America should take in migrants at the same rate that Germany had. But just this week, in a change of tone, Bill Gates said in an interview with a German newspaper that actually Europe obviously cannot survive with the rates of migration that it's got at the moment. And he said, you know, you've got to find a way to stop the boats landing. Now, if everyone is starting to realize this, why don't we start to think now about the ways to solve this? Because, as I say in my book, you know, there are a whole load of things we should have been doing from the beginning. And it was inevitable that people would realize this was a catastrophe, but we have been woefully slow in waking up to it. And I think that the lessons that America in particular has to learn from this are incredibly striking.
Yes, and routinely and assertively ignored by our policymakers, which is why it's so nice to have you on tonight. Douglas Murray, thank you.
What happened? Oh, God. What happened? What happened?
Can anything be done to stop these terror attacks? Douglas Murray is the author of The Strange Death of Europe. He joins us now. So, Douglas Murray, Spain has about 4% Muslim population. That's doubled fairly recently thanks to immigration into that country. Do you see a connection between immigration patterns and attacks like this?
Yeah, I do. I was actually on your show last week in your absence and was talking about this amazing footage of people, dozens of people, getting off a boat and just running onto a Spanish beach. This was dozens of people from sub-Saharan Africa who just went into Spain. They just walked onto the beach and then ran into the country. The Spanish authorities don't know who those people are. They haven't caught them. They haven't got them. They don't know what those people believe. They haven't even got their names. They don't know where they've come from. Nobody wants to make the connection between that and the tragic events which we see happening now commonly across Europe.
I wonder why that is. The connection is obvious. I mean, if your population changes, your society's going to change, for good and bad, probably, but this is one of the downsides. Why can't the leaders of almost any country in Western Europe draw that obvious connection?
I think it's because they have invested so much in this that they can't possibly deal with what are the obvious consequences of their own actions. You know, if I was a politician and I had had an immigration policy that meant that there were basically no borders around my country, I think I would be very, very reluctant to admit that I had any responsibility for that. And that's what these politicians are doing. Yeah. They don't have the guts, just have proper borders. And what we're seeing now, the mayhem of the immigration system in Europe, the mayhem of illegal immigration in Europe, and now the mayhem of routine terror attacks. You know, they always say, oh, well, some of these people are homegrown. Well, sure, some of them are homegrown, some of them are born here, and others have just walked in or run in to a beach one day. The Paris attackers from a couple of years ago were going in and out using the migrant routes of Greece. So, you know, it's not an either-or thing, but they've mucked up the immigration, they've mucked up the integration, and now they've got to find anything but their own actions to explain the tragedy which we're now facing on a routine basis.
That's exactly right. They're paralyzed by guilt and self-hatred. I was just in Europe the other day, and it's obvious this is a problem. Douglas, thank you for this and for all you've written on it.
Great pleasure to be with you.
We'll continue bringing you the latest coverage on this tragedy.